Consciousness is a collection of experiences, and the intensity we live those experiences. In a sense, we can see one dimension of our environment, two dimensions of our environment, three dimensions of our environment, or many, many more dimensions. So when I say consciousness, awareness, is to have a capacity to transcend the immediate and be able to look at other things that are important around you. Why is this important for sustainable development or sustainable leadership? It is because the leader needs to have such a global span, such a capacity to absorb, such a capacity to project the way, the road, and all the policies and instruments that are needed for sustainable development, that the more the leader is capable of seeing, perceiving, absorbing, the better. Sustainable development is many things at the same time. It is maybe a stage of economic growth, maybe a collection of values, maybe a bundle of rights, maybe a way to conform a power structure. It's a style of life. But to really talk about style of life, values, and so on, they are not just words. They are a state of being, and they are inside, And so we need leaders with a very expanded consciousness, that is a very large capacity to see, absorb, and project all the possible dimensions of the road they are leading towards. Finally, I think it's important to understand that leadership is not something material. Most of the attributes of leaders are non-material in the sense that you cannot buy them in the supermarket. A loving, leader, you cannot buy love in the supermarket. A compassionate leader, compassion you cannot buy in the supermarket. It's not a material thing, it's a state of your inner reality. And in that sense, leaders have to have a road of their own transformation. And their transformation means the expansion of this experience, the expansion of the intensity of that experience, the depth of that experience. So there is no way we can attain the large goals of sustainable development without a really conscious leader. Sustainability as a collection of values needs to be focusing particularly on two main sources of value. The first one is the value of interdependence. That is to say, everything depends on everything else. We depend on nature, nature depends on us, and we depend on other people, other beings, other sentient beings, and so on. Interdependence is at the core of sustainable development. If we do not self-realize this value of interdependence, it will be very difficult to say to others, protect the environment, because people are not going to see really the reason, the necessity to protect. But if we know that the tree and us are one, if we know that the animals and us are one, then we begin to value this interdependence. And interdependence is an experience. It's very difficult to tell the other, how do you feel, how do you enter into this interdependence? It's not dependence, it's not independence, it's interdependence. The second set of values are the collective values of society, because of the common good of the planet, because of the services of the common goods that we have, like oceans, mountains, lakes, rivers, and all of that. So some of the collective values are cooperation. We cannot do sustainable development without cooperation. Solidarity, justice, equity, love, compassion. These are the source of values we need now to be able to act collectively to protect the planet. So collective values are essential. Interdependence is essential. And the essence of this is that values are not just words. It's not just to say love. You have to be loving. It's not only compassion. We have the obligation, the responsibility to create a compassionate society, and that is active. When we talk about value system, we talk about something active, not something inactive, not something on the wall, but part of our path toward a better world, better welfare to everyone. And finally, the value of life, collective life, is not only about human beings. Sustainability is also about sentient beings and nature. So you have this interdependence, collective values, and the values that allow us to have a new way to understand the collective that we need to protect and defend. The term sustainable development, or sustainability in general, is a very old term. It began in a debate of development, the debate about how efficient is foreign assistance to developing countries. That is to say, you go to developing countries, finance a project that should last for 50 years, and then it ends up lasting 10 years. So the first time the word sustainability came in the debate of development was about how to maintain the level of net benefits over time. If you don't maintain this level of net benefit, you are not sustainable. And if you maintain it, you are sustainable. The conditions for that, of course, there are many. Depends on the project. If it's infrastructure, education, health, it will be different conditions to maintain it sustainable. But the way we understand it now, it began in 1962 with the book Limits to Growth. They were concerned about this material balance. They say, okay, let's fix our style of life. This style of life consumes minerals, consumes foods, consumes a lot of elements from nature. So can we sustain it? Is it possible that everyone maintain this level of reality, this style of living, with the material resources of the earth? And the conclusion in 1962 in this book, Limit to Growth, was no, it's not possible. But in current times, in present times, the debate of sustainability had to do with ecology and environment. That's more of the emphasis today. And the first definition was that a society will be sustainable when it's economically sustainable, ecologically sustainable, and socially sustainable. So the condition was this triangle of sustainability: economics, nature, and social. Then it came the definition of Gro Brundtland. Gro Brundtland said, no, it's beyond that. We need to have a society that is sustainable when our generation can satisfy their needs without constraining the possibility that also future generations can satisfy their needs. So essentially, it has to do with long term, it has to do with needs, and it has to do with future generation. So this recognition was immense. But today, sustainability is seen in many different frames. One of them is as a stage of economic growth. Not only how fast the economy should grow, not enough who eats or who consumes or who is benefited by this growth, but also how long this growth will last. So not only how fast the cake grows, who eats the cake, but how fast, how long the cake will be able to last. But this concept of sustainability is also a concept that has been put in a different frame. The society cannot be sustainable if it's not supported by values. Society cannot be sustainable if it's not supported by rights, the right to life, the right to food, the right to clean environment. And finally, sustainability is also something we have to self-realize within. Otherwise, it will look at outside us, and we call it that, conscious sustainability or conscious development. So there has always been a relationship between this idea of sustainability and the idea of development. Sustainability and sustainable development is not a philanthropic concept. It's not something of just a desire. It's something that needs to be materialized, something that in the future we need to have, we need to attain, we need to enjoy. Sustainability of the environment, sustainability of our society, sustainability of our economy, sustainability of our family, sustainability of everything. So the question is, what are the instruments, what are the policies, what are the programs, what are the character of this road towards sustainability? For that we need leadership. It will not be done just by spontaneous action. Why? Because most of the elements of sustainable development are collective. It's not just me. It's us. It's us, and the world belongs to a big human collective, other beings collective, and nature as a collective. So we need to channel the energy towards that goal of a sustainable society. And for that, we not only need, material things, material inputs. We need also people. We need citizens. We need communities. We need governments. We need private sector. We need corporations. And whenever there is this community of interest, we need leadership to be able to channel, to be able to guide, to be able to move in the right direction. So leadership and sustainability is rather unique because it's not like leading a simple corporation that is producing just shoes, or just another simple entrepreneurship in front of us. So we need leadership to be able to capture this collective nature, to capture the human nature, to capture the capacity of nature and society to go into a common direction, which is to have a sustainable society. So leadership and sustainable development are crucial to be understood. Of course, there are other variables, there are other ways to move sustainability into one direction. But sustainability without leadership is politics without commitment. It's life without spirit. It's impossible to have sustainability with the right leaders and with the right framework of leadership. One of the central issues in any society, even a society that's interested in sustainable development, is to manage the scarce resources in the right way. Resources are not infinite, nor physically or otherwise. Therefore, we need to manage under a certain set of criteria. Efficiency, for example, to produce the maximum with the least amount of resources. That could be equity, that society benefit equally across the board. There are many criteria for management, and this criteria has demanded good managers, and the managers in themselves have to respond to this set of criteria, to these fundamental principles of how to deal with the scarce resources. In the case of sustainability, it's not only managing scarce resources, but also managing the resources over a space and time. But are managers a leader? Are leaders managers? In other words, are we just to manage this process of sustainability, or should be something over and above management? And I believe that management without vision, management without a context, management without a horizon is very difficult that it produces the right result. So it is important to understand that we have to manage, but at the same time we have to lead. And leadership brings something else. It brings a capacity for a new vision. It brings a capacity to establish the grounds for a road, a critical path towards a certain goal. Leadership brings values that are very humanistic in nature, brings values which are very ecological in nature, that are brought back, to management. So management not only manage material resources, not only manage people, but manage processes, manage communities, manage, not only for results, but for human welfare. And I think it's important to have the right type of management, but also the right type of leadership. And without the right type of leadership in sustainability, it will be impossible to attain. In other words, management is a necessary condition, but the sufficient condition to attain sustainability is based on leadership. Everything is changing around us. Many years ago, the same thing, things were changing, The question is, what stimulates that change? What is provoking that change? 50 or 100 years ago, nobody really thought about environment and sustainable development. If one looks at the United Nations Charter that created the United Nations, nowhere in that charter it appears the word ecology or the word environment. The big push of that paradigm, of UN paradigm, was peace and security, lasting peace and security. Today, peace and security is also extremely important. But what is changing around us is very different. The limits to our future are not really technologically based. The limits to our future are biologically based. It's the environment now that is constraining us to go to the next step of human welfare. One example, climate change. Climate change is not just something superficial. It's not something little. It's a big thing that is conditioning how we eat, how we live, how we progress, how we transform a given society. So if the paradigm of the past, was good enough to resolve, to project the transformational process of the past, this paradigm is not now adequate to lead us to a new future. If we just think about climate change as the only variable, and we know it's not the only variable, but as the only variable that promotes change in a particular direction, that enough needs a new paradigm of understanding of how climate change affects every activity of human life. Therefore, my idea is that sustainable development also is evolving. At the beginning, sustainable development paradigm was about maintaining the net level of benefit of investments. Then it came to be based only on ecological variables. Natural resources, renewable and non-renewable resources were the main force to create this new idea of sustainable development. But today we have to go beyond, because it's not only about natural resources, it's about how our use of natural resources affects human life, affects sentient beings' life, affects nature. So the main core of this new paradigm that I'm suggesting is the healing of the planet, the regeneration of this planet, because the young generation has the right to receive this planet equally or better than we receive it. And the old paradigm, the paradigm of economic efficiency, the paradigm of globalization, is not going to do it. And this is why I am promoting a new paradigm that is called a sustainable society with an empowered citizenship. To create a sustainable future is not a philanthropic thought. It is something we need to build every day and starting now. To build this new future needs to understand who is going to be benefit and who are the ones that are going to carry the decision-making process, the institutional arrangement, the incentives, all that is necessary to create this new future. In the past, leadership was of a different character, was top-down. You have a president and you have someone to follow the president. You have a chancellor and then everyone needs to follow the chancellor. This pyramidal way of leadership has collapsed. Today we need a new leadership to create a sustainable future. And we are seeing it right now, how social media has enabled to democratize leadership. There are thousands and thousands of young people today in the world who are actually leading this process. A few months ago, 350,000 people went to New York, to march for climate change, to really give solution to the climate change that we are all now feeling and having the consequence of. So not only we need to change the paradigm of development towards sustainable development, but we need to recognize that there will be new forms of leadership. How this energy of the collective, will be channeled, how it's going to be moved into one point where, we will have the result we want, is still a big issue. It's still a big question. So if we don't have a pyramidal form of leadership, the challenge is to know what form of leadership, new form of leadership, will be able to lead us towards sustainable development. And I can say, one, communities. Sustainable development comes from the local to the global. So leadership at the community level is very important. Leadership of major sectors like labor, like industry, like government is also very important. And leadership, and intergenerational leadership, is also important, and we need to give the room and the space for the young generation to be, face by face with the decision-making process at the local level, the national level, and the planetary level. Sustainable development is about people for two reasons. Number one, because nature affects people. Weather affects people. The availability of water affects people. The availability of air, food, land, all these natural resources affect people. So if we have dirty water, this is affecting people via health problems, And so we have this first very important reason why people should be involved in sustainable development. Again, because nature affects people. But also we need to understand that people affect nature, So if you don't recycle, if you don't really protect your own house, you don't protect your own parks, you don't protect the animals, you don't protect the forest, and we just destroy them, of course, this also will affect people. So nature affects people, people affect nature. So the question is whether people should lead. Of course they should. We all should lead into the objective of sustainable development. But in order to lead, we need, number one, to know what is the path, what is the critical path we want all us to be. And sustainability gives us a few very important elements of this main objective for people. One, good health, good food, good life, good community. That is essential to sustainable development. One of the most important criterion of sustainable development is the creation of communities. So, in essence, sustainable development is a people-based concept. It's not an esoteric concept. It's not a concept detached from people. When we detach sustainability from people, then we have a real problem. Sustainable development will never be attained. So the question is, should people lead this or let other institutions of society to lead it in a different way? My response is that you need to empower people, so people empowered and having a very good knowledge of sustainable development can protect their community, can protect their land, can protect their cities, can protect their neighborhood, can protect their family. People's leadership is essential to attain sustainable development. In general, when we talk about rights, we tend to talk about human rights. There are several types of rights, civil and political rights. One example is the right to vote. You have economic, social, and cultural rights. Rights that people have, for example, the right to water, the right to housing, the right to healthy food, the right to life. These are economic, social, and cultural rights. The question that we need to ask ourselves, if it's only people the subject of rights, or rights are also the subject of other entities in society. My view is that nature is not a thing. Nature is a living being. Maybe trees don't speak like I do. Maybe animals cannot express themselves like I do. But if I respect nature, if nature is part of me and me is part of nature, and all of us are forms of life in a big matrix of life, all that is life has rights. The question then is not about rights. Nature must have rights. Animals must have rights. The question is who is responsible for implementing those rights. I give you an example. Your baby is just born. Your baby has rights because it's a human. But who is responsible for implementing those rights? Probably the baby doesn't have the ability to implement those rights. So you as a father or mother will implement those rights. Here, the same thing happens with nature. Nature and animals, are live entities. If they are alive, they have energy. If they have energy, they have intelligence. If they have intelligence, they have consciousness. So here it is human law, vis-a-vis natural law. Which one is superior? I would say, in my experience, natural law is much more superior than human law. Usually nature doesn't make the mistake we do with laws. There are also laws of the market. So we have different types of law system. Here what we are saying is we need to open the human law, the legal framework under which we all live to protect nature, to give rights to nature, to give right to animals. And we human beings to become responsible for those rights. So the essence is that not only there are civil and political rights, not only economic, social, and cultural rights, all oriented to human, we have to get away from this homocentric way to establish human laws, to incorporate natural law, and therefore nature must have rights, animal must have rights, and we need to have the responsibility to implement them. Most of the time we hear that corporations, governments, individuals do things with the view to gain profits. Profits as some sort of general criteria to guide, to force, to mold, to transform our society. But profits come from a notion of the market. It is the market that gives profit through supply and demand. The question is, if we want our life to be dominated, to be guided by just profits. I give you an example. How much water cost? You know, how much would you value this glass of water? You know, what happens if water disappears from the planet because this profit-making community, you know, uses too much water? Then we are dead. There is no more life in the planet. How much do you value cultural assets? How much do you value the California condor? You know, the Andes? How much do you value the Pacific Ocean? Markets and profits are okay for man-made goods. They are not okay for human welfare in general. That includes environment, they include ecology, not only in terms of the physical resources, but also the services that those resources give to human life. Therefore, the concept of profit is a very narrow concept. It's a concept that might be good for management of scarce material resources, but it's not good enough to guide society into higher and higher levels of welfare, prosperity, and human transformation. Therefore, we need to change many concepts that today we apply with the view to make profits. Like, what is development? What is welfare, human welfare? What is prosperity? What is transformation? Is transformation to have more? Is transformation to do more? Is prosperity to know more? Or in the end, prosperity, transformation, development, human welfare is to be more? And here is the big dilemma of which we need to open to the paradigm of being and not only having. Today in our society, because consumption guides development, you know, production and consumption and trade as the basis for profit is not going to take us to a better society, to a prosperous society that includes not only this material gain, but it also includes non-material gains like self-identity, you know, belonging, having the capacity to live in communities, having the desire that the whole collective gains and not only a few of them inside the collective. So let's change from profit to prosperity, but prosperity understood not only as material welfare, but also spiritual welfare. Most countries of the world have understood that attaining sustainability requires collective action, collective in the sense of all countries concerned by the same objectives and try to put their own means to attain those objectives. First, the United Nations has played a fundamental role in, creating the foundation for these goals. First, the Millennium Development Goals, and now the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are not only goals in themselves, related to sustainability, but they represent a blueprint of some agreement among nations that we need to move towards in the next few years. This is a fundamental step for peace and security in the world. It's a fundamental step for prosperity in the world. It's a fundamental step to have societies that are happy and in harmony with nature. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals that goes from energy to infrastructure to gender to poverty alleviation to urban development and so on and so forth. These are very important to focus the energy and the resources of the planet to a new form of harmony, with the planet to a new form of life as a collective humanity. Naturally, in our life, objectives are not enough. I may have the objective to be a better person, but to be a better person, I need to do something. I need to not only just say, I want to be a better person. And here we find several limitations that are important to recognize so that we move into the right direction in the near future. The first one, there is no planetary democracy. There is not an institution that has a planetary, view of things. And in this world, we know perfectly well who is in command, who has more influence among the countries in this planet. So we need to first close this gap, this democracy gap that is limiting many actions to lead to sustainable development. The second thing, we need to have resources. And unfortunately, not every country has the same resources, material resources and human resources. Therefore, we need to close this other gap in terms of financing these sustainable development goals. And finally, we need to have a human experience. We need to have the human factor as part and parcel of this process toward getting to these sustainable development objectives. Without the human factor, there is no sustainability. Without the human factor, there is no understanding of really the nature and scope of these sustainable development goals. So the view now is a new consciousness for these sustainable development goals, a new form of participation of civil society, closing the gap on democracy around the world, and created planetary institutions that are able to respond and materialize the instrument that we need to reach these goals. Most countries of the world have understood that attaining sustainability requires collective action, collective in the sense of all countries concerned by the same objectives and try to put their own means to attain those objectives. First, the United Nations has played a fundamental role in, creating the foundation for these goals. First, the Millennium Development Goals, and now the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are not only goals in themselves, related to sustainability, but they represent a blueprint of some agreement among nations that we need to move towards in the next few years. This is a fundamental step for peace and security in the world. It's a fundamental step for prosperity in the world. It's a fundamental step to have societies that are happy and in harmony with nature. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals that goes from energy to infrastructure to gender to poverty alleviation to urban development and so on and so forth. These are very important to focus the energy and the resources of the planet to a new form of harmony with the planet, to a new form of life as a collective humanity. Naturally, in our life, objectives are not enough. I may have the objective to be a better person, but to be a better person, I need to do something. I need to not only just say, I want to be a better person. And here we find several limitations that are important to recognize so that we move into the right direction in the near future. The first one, there is no planetary democracy. There is not an institution that has a planetary, view of things. And in this world, we know perfectly well who is in command, who has more influence among the countries in this planet. So we need to first close this gap, this democracy gap that is limiting many actions to lead to sustainable development. The second thing, we need to have resources. And unfortunately, not every country has the same resources, material resources and human resources. Therefore, we need to close this other gap in terms of financing these sustainable development goals. And finally, we need to have a human experience. We need to have the human factor as part and parcel of this process toward getting to these sustainable development objectives. Without the human factor, there is no sustainability. Without the human factor, there is no understanding of really the nature and scope of these sustainable development goals. So the view now is a new consciousness for these sustainable development goals, a new form of participation of civil society, closing the gap on democracy around the world, and created planetary institutions that are able to respond and materialize the instrument that we need to reach these goals. To attain sustainable development cannot be an abstract proposition. It has to be a very concrete proposition. That is to say, if part of sustainable development is the need for recycling, someone has to recycle. If part of sustainable development is not to produce too much waste, too much, materials that are negative to the economy, this has to be materialized, this has to be implemented. In the past, most people said this is a government issue. Cleaning water, cleaning the air, having a better health for people and so on. These are public goods. This is a responsibility of the government. In my view, sustainable development will never be attained without the private sector, without the corporate sector. Because they have the possibility to create new technologies, create new industrial processes, to create new ways to come with a different understanding of the responsibility towards the public good of humanity. This is not just a responsibility of an individual. It's not just a responsibility of a community or a government. It's a responsibility of everyone, and this is where the private sector becomes a key piece to sustainability. And I believe that the sustainable development will change of character, will change of nature, will change of form once the corporate sector becomes part and parcel of a new wave, a new industrial revolution, a new way to produce goods and services for the whole of humanity. It is not possible to have a corporate sector that doesn't understand that the carbonization of the planet is negative not only for them, it's negative for everyone. We cannot have a corporate sector that believes that to address the ozone layer depletion, is something just of government, when many of the gases that are creating, and are destroying the ozone layer come from the corporate world. At the climate summit, someone said only a handful of international corporations produce more than 70% of these gases, that are creating global warming and climate change. So the call here is for a new deal, a new pact, a new form of action, a new way to deal with sustainable development in which the private sector is a key pillar for this. This is not just philanthropy. This is survival. The new economy will be sustainable. The new economy will come from a new concept of sustainability. Therefore, you are part and parcel of this new economy. There will not be profit. There will not be profit. There will not be capital gains. There will not be returns to the investment if we destroy nature. So it's not only a philanthropic issue, it's a survival issue for the corporate sector. The future of corporations depends on the way we have this industrial revolution, which I call moving from steam engines to human consciousness, when the corporate sector has the consciousness that we need to produce, and keep all the cycle of production, consumption, trade, and rehabilitation and recycling into one center, sustainable development. Today, sustainable development is mainly influenced by masculine energy. That's why many people have made out of sustainable development the doing, the knowing, the having, and this sustainable development responds to the same rules of a system that created the ecological crisis and the environmental crisis. So there is some contradiction. We need to bring urgently feminine energy into this. And this is a fundamental piece of the future of our society. Not only an economics of profits making, not only an economics of having more, that more is better, to an economics of caring and sharing and cooperating. This is the great value of feminine energy, the capacity to share, the capacity to care, the capacity to distribute in a very specific way our nature, our natural resources and its services. The future of sustainable development will depend on this great feminine energy. If we want to heal the environment, if we want to make peace with the environment, we have to base our methods, our practices on feminine energy. It is the feminine side that is really the important ingredient for sustainable development goals, all the sustainable development goals. This is why we call Mother Earth. We don't call it Father Earth. This is why we call it Pachamama. This is why we call all of this our great planet is a feminine energy that is driven now the future of sustainable development. The objective of sustainable development needs to be accompanied by empowerment. This means that sustainable development needs to be born from the grassroots up. It has to come from the community. It has to be local. I understand it also has to be global, but these two needs to come together. And the dynamics of joining the local with the global is given by people. It is people who are going to create the conditions, are going to create the spaces for sustainable development to happen. This means that we have to have communities of people who are empowered to speak, who are empowered to dialogue, who are empowered to make decisions, who are empowered to implement the sustainable development goals. Sustainable development with no empowerment of the people is simply the reflection, the mirror image of the establishment of political and economic power of today. And we know that the consciousness of this power of economics and politics created the problems that sustainable development needs to resolve. Therefore, this new collective consciousness must come from the people. This is why, in my view, the new road, the new critical path must be a sustainable society with the empowerment of people. Sustainable society without empowerment of the grassroots of this reality will never work. This is something that will imply to change institutions, to change organization, to change incentives, so sustainable development finally will happen. So when we talk about empowerment, we talk about outer empowerment, my capacity to act, my capacity to relate. But also I'm talking about inner empowerment. That is to say, I need to strengthen my self-confidence. I need to strengthen my sense of identity. I need to strengthen my sense of belonging. If I don't feel that I belong to this nature, to the planet, most probably I will not respect the planet, I will not conserve the planet, I will not protect the planet. So empowerment is also our capacity, our engine to be able to self-realize the collective values of sustainable development, like caring, sharing, cooperating, interdependence, equity, justice, love and compassion. No empowerment, no sustainable development. Every one of us has a style of life. The way we use time, when we take breakfast, when we take lunch, dinner, if we work or we don't work, if we live in a home or an apartment, if we live in a farm, in a city or in a rural area, we have a style of life, a way to immerse ourselves into nature, immerse ourselves into a given community. This style of life has a lot to do with what is happening in the world today. If this style of life, for example, consumes a lot of carbon, it creates a lot of pollution, it takes more than it gives back to nature, naturally, in the longer term, this style of life is not sustainable. So in a sense, it's like a paradox. Sustainability is a style of life. It's a style of life where we respect the laws of nature. It's a style of life where we protect forest. It's a style of life where we don't pollute. It's a style of life where we protect animal. It's a style of life where there is a harmony between my life, our life, and nature. So to talk about style of life is important because in the end, many governments and many communities want to maintain their welfare, their sort of notion of how good I want to live, how good my lifestyle should be. But you have to understand that each style of life has an implication, has an impact on nature, absorb resources, absorb services from these resources, maybe more than we give back to them. For example, if my style of life is to produce more garbage, mountains of garbage will be produced in the planet, and therefore someone else will have to take care of it. So my style of life might not be harmonious with nature. If my style of life means that I will keep cutting the tropical forest, the basic fundamental lungs of the world, then maybe my style of life is not sustainable. It's not sustainable because there is not enough forest to supply to your style of life, nor it is sustainable because you are taking away from some other people that cannot get at least the minimum standard of life in this planet. So a debate about style of life is fundamental. We cannot keep the style of life of developed countries. This is not possible. There are not enough resources to do that. There is not enough nature to do that. So in the end, what is going to cause the great revolution in this planet is this change in a style of life forced by crises like climate change, like pollution of the ocean, like the deterioration of glaciers, like the depletion of biodiversity. So the debate on a style of life and sustainable development is not a cute thing. It's not just a conversation. It's at the essence of the future of the planet. The United Nations was created here in San Francisco, and people signed a charter whose first sentence was "We the people." We the people. Who are we the people? Only those who signed the charter or the whole community of the planet? To me, we the people means a recognition that all of us in this planet have something to say to unite nations for a better future. This is why this is called United Nations. It's because we need to unite all countries, all nations for a planetary purpose. But this is better, it's easier said than done. It is better to explain what are the fundamentals. First of all, we the people means that we are a collective entity. We are not just me, as independent entities. No, it's the we, it's the together that makes we the people. And this is the only way we're going to conserve the planet. It's the only way we're going to protect the planet. This is the only way we're going to be able to live in this planet. We the people also means not only human beings, it means sentient beings, it means nature. We need to have this collective, absorbing not only human beings, but sentient beings and nature. Third, when we say we the people, we are saying we are alive, we are present, we are here. But we are not living in a dead planet. This is not a planet who is dead. This is a planet who is alive, that has energy, has life, has memory, has consciousness. And therefore, when we say we the people, we are also saying, all these levels, subtle levels of human existence and nature existence. And we say we the people, we are also saying we have a responsibility, we have a commitment. We the people are saying we want a different planet. We the people are saying we want a better life. We the people means we are willing to take the responsibility for future generations. So this sentence, we the people and sustainable development, is at the core of what we can do in the future. This is not going to be the arithmetic summation of countries. No countries will be able to save itself alone. We are all together or nothing is going to happen to the world. Now, in terms of the United Nations, this means great reform, because for the moment, we the people means we the governments, and we need to change that. That means people need to come to the UN. The question is, how is it going to come to the UN? And I think it's going to come by bringing civil society into the decision-making process of the UN. And I have this proposal that we need to expand a council like the Trusteeship Council from simply debating issues of the colonies to issues of citizenship in decision-making of the UN. So there will be a citizens' UN, a new UN with governments but with the people. This is what the actual meaning of we the people is. To have a better planet for ourselves, to have a better planet for future generations, we need a moment with the private sector. The private sector has one of the most powerful keys to open the door to this better future. but not only as a philanthropic thing. You have to understand that a lot of the pollution in the world comes from the private sector. A lot of the deterioration, a lot of the destruction of our biodiversity comes from the private sector. So now is the moment for all of us joining the private sector to take this big responsibility. So what should the private sector do? Create a new form of industrial revolution that is carbon zero. There is no carbon print on this revolution. They should also change the corporation not as just a unit for making things, but offering the space for decent work and the self-realization of everyone who works in those corporations. We need to have a corporation that is capable to immerse itself into communities. So the profit-making criterion is not the only one. We need to bring also the creation of community, the harmony with nature, and put all together this new corporation of the future. The great industrial revolution will move all of us from the steam engines to human consciousness, because corporations are no more and no less than people. Call it owners, call it CEOs and managers, call it workers. In a sense, the corporation of today reflects the personality, the intake of the people who work in those corporations, particularly of managers and owners. Today we need to change the course of humanity, and the corporate world has the responsibility and has the possibility to help us into a new planet, into a new type of welfare, into a new type of development and human transformation. Today we're seeing a very unique phenomenon around the debate of sustainable development and sustainable development goals. It has to do with the notion of stakeholders. Who has a stake on sustainable development? In the end, the whole society has a stake on sustainable development. Private sector, government sector, and now civil society. Civil society is so active, and is getting more active because of the democratization of information and social media. So today we see how important it is to listen to a different perspective of sustainable development, a perspective that comes from everyday life, from everyday challenges, from everyday needs. This is something that should not be stopped. It should be expanded. It should be actually create more incentives for this to happen. In terms of climate change, we see, for example, that one person in the Nordic countries, Greta Thunberg, is able to mobilize civil society behind these sustainable development goals. But it's not only just an activity, it's also a way to create new concepts, new morality, new ethics, new debates. You know, when someone says you are constraining our future lives, we are creating, you know, a new array of debates around that, and that's how civil society has been bringing new value system, new structures, new ways of doing it. Today, also we need to ask, how is it that civil society, governments, and the corporate world will do it together? Today we don't have a blueprint of how to govern sustainable development with these three great stakeholders. And this is a very important one. But there is another part of civil society I want to mention very explicitly, which are indigenous peoples. You know, sometimes civil society is urban civil society. It's those who are able to go to the streets. It's those who are able to have computers and have technology to be able to demonstrate, to be able to give their opinion. But to me, if we don't really connect to the origin of the debate, the origin of knowledge, the origin of wisdom behind the debate of sustainability comes from indigenous people. You know, this concept of the earth as a unity, this concept, this cosmovision, you know, that everything is linked to everything else, it comes from indigenous people. So I like to pay a tribute to indigenous people, and at the same time say it is crucial that we give all the space, all the resources, all the opportunities to maintain, to preserve, and to enhance indigenous knowledge that today is, you know, sort of disappearing little by little because our society doesn't have the sensitivity and the sensibility to understand this knowledge, to perceive this knowledge, and to have this knowledge. So we still have the opportunity to preserve the knowledge of indigenous people, and this is something we have to put it in the first part, in the first layer of the strategy on sustainable development. today we're seeing a very unique phenomenon around the debate of sustainable development and sustainable development goals. It has to do with the notion of stakeholders. Who has a stake on sustainable development? In the end, the whole society has a stake on sustainable development. Private sector, government sector, and now civil society. Civil society is so active, and it's getting more active because of the democratization of information and social media. So today we see how important it is to listen to a different perspective of sustainable development, a perspective that comes from everyday life, from everyday challenges, from everyday needs. This is something that should not be stopped. It should be expanded. It should be actually create more incentives for this to happen. In terms of climate change, we see, for example, that one person in the Nordic countries, Greta Thunberg, is able to mobilize civil society behind these sustainable development goals. But it's not only just an activity, it's also a way to create new concepts, new morality, new ethics, new debates. You know, when someone says you are constraining our future lives, we are creating, you know, a new array of debates around that, and that's how civil society has been bringing new value system, new structures, new ways of doing it. Today, also, we need to ask, how is it that civil society, governments, and the corporate world will do it together? Today, we don't have a blueprint of how to govern sustainable development with these three great stakeholders. And this is a very important one. But there is another part of civil society I want to mention very explicitly, which are indigenous peoples. You know, sometimes civil society is urban civil society. It's those who are able to go to the streets. It's those who are able to have computers and have technology to be able to demonstrate, to be able to give their opinion. But to me, if we don't really connect to the origin of the debate, the origin of knowledge, the origin of wisdom behind the debate of sustainability comes from indigenous people. You know, this concept of the earth as a unity, this concept, this cosmovision, you know, that everything is linked to everything else, it comes from indigenous people. So I like to pay a tribute to indigenous people, and at the same time say it is crucial that we give all the space, all the resources, all the opportunities to maintain, to preserve, and to enhance indigenous knowledge that today is, you know, sort of disappearing little by little because our society doesn't have the sensitivity and the sensibility to understand this knowledge, to perceive this knowledge, and to have this knowledge. So we still have the opportunity to preserve the knowledge of indigenous people, and this is something we have to put it in the first part, in the first layer of the strategy on sustainable development. Today, the youth is at the center stage of the debate on sustainable development. Why? Because they have realized that if we don't take care of the planet, they will have no future. Actually, even if we do something, but we don't do it right, they will have a worse future than the ones we had when we received or we were born in this planet. For the first time in the history of humanity, the young generation will receive the planet worse than we receive it in our generation. This is not only a tragic situation, but a major ethical issue. The youth now is prepared to lead the world. The youth now has all the technological foundations, has all the means to connect and reconnect with every young person in the planet. So the youth is a political force, the youth is an economic force, the youth is a social force, and the youth is a community force. When I was very young, I never made a decision in my household. The decisions were made by the older generation. Today, the greatest decision in a household are made by the children. The children are a fundamental pillar of any household around the world. So the big challenge that the youth has today is to choose a form of leadership that will enable the thinking, the wisdom, and the ideas and programs to be channeled to the right point of decision making. Today we need to find new ways of leading the planet in a planetary way, not simply in a country by country way. So I am asking all the youth in this planet to continue fighting for the preservation of this planet, to continue fighting and acting to heal this planet. If the planet is not healed, what is going to happen? This is going to translate into a lot of illnesses, diseases of the mind, the body, and the soul. So it's not just a philanthropic statement. It's a statement that requires investment. It's a statement that requires policies. It's a statement that requires program. It's a statement that requires collaboration, cooperation. It requires networking. It requires entrepreneurship. It requires, corporations of all sorts to be able to bring up, a new way to live in this planet. I say to the youth of the world, you have the pan by the handle. This is a time that the youth need to get to power everywhere. Corporate power, government power, political power. Don't shy away from really getting involved in all decisions that need to be taken care of for the future of this planet. Otherwise, there will not be a future. I am 72 years old. I belong to the older generation inhabiting this planet. And the question that I often ask myself now, after 40-some years of work, after having been a young child, a youth, a young adult, an adult, and now an elder, what is my role in this society? What is the role of all these elders that we have in the world? I believe that we have something very important to contribute to this world, and in particular to contribute to sustainable development or taking care of the planet. We have an experience about the right and wrong of the last 50 or 100 years. This is very important, so the institutional memory is not lost by putting the elder aside. Second, we are a generation of very interesting values, because we are a generation that understands that individualism and materialism will not do it. We are a good bridge, between the present and the future. We need to have an understanding that all generations count, that all generations can bring their input, their values, their wisdom into the problems of the world. Let us not separate generations. This is sometimes done politically, in a sense, it's manipulated politically to say young generation, old generation. We are one generation. I remember a young person in a big conference said, I am tired to be told that I am from the future generation. I am the present generation. I answered back and I said, I am also tired to be told that I am an old generation. I am also a present generation. I don't think we will be able to operate. We are not going to be able to confront the challenges of humanity now if we leave generations aside. So we need to talk about, intergenerational justice, how we are going to distribute and redistribute our resources over space and time. Which resources will not be allowed to be used by the present generation and only by the future generation. These are big decisions now. How much we can transform the earth, how many more trees we can cut, how many fish we can, take from the waters, how much water can we waste in this planet. Let's get together and have an intergenerational action plan for the conservation and the future of all of us in this planet. You and us are one. Technology seems to be the word of today, but also was the word of my time. People will say the only way to advance in this planet is with new technology, better technology. All these terms, new, better, But essentially, technology is us. Technology is the result of our wisdom, our intelligence, our knowledge, our memory. So, in some sense, technology is the mirror image of a given generation. Now, in the past, after World War I and World War II, we needed to reconstruct Europe. We needed to develop developing countries, so technology went in that direction to resolve problems of hunger, poverty, inequities, in many, many countries. I'm not saying that these problems of hunger and poverty are not there. They're still there, unfortunately. So it means that the path that is a result of the technological change we have put into this planet is not necessarily the best one. Why? Because now we need new technologies for the common public good. We need technology for the we, for the together. So if you are there listening to me, you know that preserving the animals of this planet is a collective work. It's a collective endeavor. And thus we need the technology, the human technology, the institutional technology, the hardware, but also the software of technology, so that we can see in the future that the California condor, that the elephants, the zebras, the monkeys, the orangutans, and all of them are part of this planet. The same thing with regard to climate change. This is not something will be done by one country. So we need new technology for industries, new technologies for transport, new technologies of communication, new technologies for recycling, so that we don't contaminate the air and we don't change the climate unnecessarily. So there are many common goods that need a new way to think about technology. Not a technology that is a result of profit making, not a technology that is only the result of what the market says, but it's a technology that is a result and driven by what we, the people, really are looking for in this planet. We need to have the proper incentives so this technology comes up in a way that everyone benefits and not only a few people benefit from what we have here, a beautiful land. Look at this bay, look at this ocean, look at what is surrounding us. This needs to be preserved for humanity. Nobody is the owner of nature, so technology cannot be just the ownership of the market. The future of technology resides in the future of consciousness. New technology will only come about as a result of a new consciousness, because the consciousness that created the technology, that in the end created the problems, doesn't have the instrument or the attributes for the solution. So we need to go hand in hand, technology and human awareness, human collective consciousness.